So as we've progressed through variable types and our various different kinds of example and challenge programs, what you'll have noticed is you are making an awful lot of attempts to create similar data. If we are looking at listing out the months of the year, what we essentially have to do is create a list, right? A list of 12 separate string variables, and each one of those would hold a value: January, February, March, etc. If I am going around a classroom full of students and I'm looking at getting in the names of the students, I would have to have 20 or more individual variables to store that data set into. And over time, and it's really not that long a period of time, over 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 variables, it becomes pretty clear that there has to be a better way to group homogeneous, so similar data. And that is exactly where the array comes in. It is simply a slightly more complex container wherein we are able to store values of the same kind. So we would be looking at an integer array or a double array or a string array. So we can store variables of the same kind that are essentially connected via some kind of meaning inside of our program. So it has meaning to us as a developer. So an array makes your life easier as a developer because instead of having to list out 51 variables of a string type and giving them all different variable names, state name 1, state name 2, or state name alphabetically first, whatever the horrible name you have to give it, you can simply declare a string or an array of strings of 51 strings. And then you can read into that one array of 51 strings all the names of the United States, and boom, you're done. It gives you, as a developer, such a great amount of granular control over such a wide amount of data. It turns out to work exceptionally well in your favor. As far as declaring an array, you would start off with the type of array, so integer, character, double, float, etc. After that would come the string name, the very same thing here, the array name rather. The same thing here that applies, carries over from everything else we've done. Good array names are clear. I don't have to guess what it is exactly that you're trying to get to, and it gives a future developer exactly the idea of why it is that you've declared the string here. After that, inside of the braces, so they're not curly brackets, they're simply the braces. So if you took a staple and put it on its side, there you go. Inside of that, you would have the number. So we would have double, average score, and 25. So we would be looking to collect 25 scores. A note here on what happens in C++ as it deals with us reading values into an array. If you flip over to page, 384 in the text, it's really the whole of section 7.3. What the text is telling you here is that C++ does not do what is called bounds checking or boundaries checking. So that means if I have declared and intend on using an array of strings for the state names, and I have declared it at 51, that means that the maximum value, or the maximum number of values I can read into there is 51. At 52, 53, 54, etc., simply nothing is stored. The compiler and the runtime environment do not give you any idea that this is happening. There is no way to recover that data once it is that we have, in the live environment, kind of iterated past that. That data simply goes away. Now, later on in the chapter, we're going to talk about vectors. Vectors are essentially black magic that let us get around all of these considerations about boundary and bounds checking. But it's important to know that C++ will not do this for you. So what's a good idea here as a developer? Well, number one, give yourself more room than you think is necessary. So if I expect that I'm going to have to provide a list of the names of the postal states that I can send letters to for the United States, I am going to want to provide an array size that is bigger than I think I'm going to need. Not crazy big, so I don't need 1 million strings in my array. I don't need 75 strings in my array. 52, probably not enough. 60, that's probably pretty close. 65, there's no way in the lifetime of my particular development that I'm going to need to go over 65 state names. So we're safe there. We're not being, cavalier and throwing away storage, but at the same time, storage is cheap. It's not causing me a huge amount of headaches down the road. I can simply list all of my values here, and when I'm iterating through my array and I see a state name that happens to be empty, I'll know that there's no more data here in my array, and I can stop iterating through my array. It gives me a really clever way, I suppose, of assuring that I have enough space, but not providing way too much space that I'm never, ever going to use. So do be aware when you are creating an array in C++ that you had better make sure that through your looping statements, you had better make sure that through conditional testing that you are not trying to assign more values to the array than there are elements in the array. While we're at it, let's have another really quick reminder about the first element of the array, just in case I haven't defined this. An element in the array is any one of the values, the types, the actual cells. So if you're thinking about an array kind of like an Excel spreadsheet, any individual cell would really be an element in your array. Do remember that the very first one is always 0. So this means that when you are looping through your arrays, let's suggest I'm going to create a while loop to iterate through my array, or loop through. And I have 10 elements in my array. That means that the first one is 0, and the last element in my array is the number 9. This will lead to the off by 1 error. What I can tell you is these are still copious in your programming. These are still copious occasionally when I program. When we are looking at large program developments, they still happen relatively often. This off by 1 is something that there is no protection against aside from your own good programming practice. So do remember that the elements in the array start with 0. When you're working with a user, is it okay to essentially throw away the 0 element in the array? Yeah, maybe. When I'm working with somebody to enter in data, I can't, as a developer, say, enter in the 0th data. You're going to say enter in the first piece of data. There's 2 ways to deal with this. Number 1, you could essentially add 1 to the counter so that if I'm really referring to the element 0, the user thinks I'm referring to element 1, and then we're all good. Or you could simply throw away element 0 and create all of your looping mechanisms, create all of your mathematical mechanisms around not dealing with the element at 0. That's perfectly okay too, as long as, number 1, your shop think that that's perfectly okay, and number 2, as you're building your developments, all of them take that same track. Otherwise, you're developing confusion. You're switching between nomenclatures there for how do I create an array, and really that's very bad programming practice, and really at the end of the day that's very bad news. So do be aware of the off by one issue. They're very common, easily avoidable, and there's nobody to blame but you, which makes it suck even more.